I prefer the lonely places, wandering behind a pair of bird dogs in search of what's over the next hill. My passion for upland hunting has led me to multiple states. These travels have allowed me to see the beauty of this great land and meet some interesting people. I hope to introduce you to many of those people and encourage you to look for what's over your next hill. Today I'm talking with Alan McCallie of Chattanooga, Tennessee about his southern upland hunting adventures. The podcast is sponsored by Pike Gear. An upland hunter who hunts hard needs clothing that is light and makes hunting easier, not harder. An upland hunter is always on the move and always thinking about his next move. He needs clothing that can move with him, clothing that doesn't hold him back or weigh him down. Pike Gear is designed for upland hunters who are always on the go and always dreaming about their next hunting trip. Visit pikegear.com to find the best upland hunting clothing you will ever wear. Follow Pike Gear on Facebook and Instagram. Additionally, I've picked up a new sponsor, JM Knives. John Moore makes custom knives to order. He recently made me a beautiful and effective Cocobolo-handled bird knife. Let him make you a custom order knife you'll be proud to show your hunting partners. Contact me on Instagram for John's contact information. And Alan, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Ryan. I certainly enjoy the opportunity to do so, and thank you for hosting this podcast, which is a great service of all of us who love doing the same things you do, particularly traveling behind bird dogs over wide open spaces. I am a gray-haired, gray-bearded, old-time southeastern bird hunter. Spent my whole life in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I actually grew up in a family with pointers, which is funny to think back on now. My father was a doctor in Chattanooga, but liked to bird hunt back at a time when you could drive a short distance outside of Chattanooga and actually find quail. And we had pointers as children, but I really did not ever pick up the sport then. I did not covet owning bird dogs, and of course went away to college and fell in love with trout fishing and fly fishing and would travel out west to fly fish. And Tennessee now has some spectacular tailwater trout fisheries that are the rivals of any in the country. And for many, many years, that was my favorite outdoor passion. I was lucky to have friends, particularly getting into my mid to late 30s and early 40s, who loved bird hunting, who had connections to travel out to the Midwest to go bird hunting. And through them, I began to be exposed as an adult to the joys of bird hunting, exposed again to the joys of bird hunting, and the particular joys of bird dogs. I had friends with Brittany's and setters and pointers, and particularly German short hairs. And yet, with all of that being the case, and I would enjoy tagging along 25 or 30 years ago with my friends on local quail hunts, what actually got me back into bird hunting full time, I fell backwards into it. My wife, after we had gotten married almost 30 years ago, and she had moved from Texas to Chattanooga, could not find a job comparable to what she had been doing in Texas. And so after looking for many years, she said, if I can't have a job, I want a dog. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, what am I going to get into? And I frankly had visions of an unattractive lap dog, yap dog, ankle biter. And I said, honey, you have earned the right to have a dog. What kind of dog are you thinking about? And she said, oh, I've always loved this dog called a Vizslas.
Oh, there you go.
I said, what? And she said, a Vizslas. I would like to have a Vizslas. I've never seen one in Chattanooga. And I had no idea at that time what a Vizslas was. And if what I'm about to tell you were not true, I could not make it up. Within the next 2 or 3 days, I was out duck hunting with my lifelong friend Pat Graham from Chattanooga. And I said, boy, I'm about to get into a real mess. My wife says she is tired of looking for a job and she wants a dog instead. She wants something called a Vizslas. And Pat said, are you serious? And I said, yeah. And he said, your wife wants you to give her a Vizslas. And I said, yeah, I don't have any idea what a Vizslas is. And he said, man, it is supposedly the wind them up, put them down, do it all bird dog of all time. And your wife wants you to give her one. And I said, she does. And he said, not only is the Vizslas supposed to be the all-time natural-born fur and feather and retriever and everything, but there's only one guy guy in Chattanooga who breeds them. He is the printer at the company I work. He has got a litter of 8 on the ground, and he cannot sell them. And I said, this is an unbelievable, it literally, you talk about gifts from heaven. And so I remember his name, Leo Doolin, was the breeder of the only Vizslas in Chattanooga. And I called him up expecting to have my arm broken and said, Leo, Pat Graham put me on you, says that you breed Vizslas, and I'm interested in giving my wife a Vizsla for a Christmas present in 1993. And I have no idea what a Vizsla is worth or what a Vizsla should be, what I should pay for a Vizsla. And I'd like to think that they're out of hunting lines, but I can't be picky. Tell me what you got. And he said, I've got 3 left. You can have any one of them, and it's $100. And so that's how I ended up owning my first personal bird dog, other than the ones I grew up with. Named her Madison after the Madison River, where I love to trout fish. And I immediately fell in love with this loud, yappy. Vizslas are extraordinarily vocal, and they seem to have an incredible vocabulary of their own. And so I brought home this 7-week-old red dog just after Christmas in 1993. Immediately, she became our child. We had not yet started a family at that point, and so the Vizsla moved in and took over. And I was smitten not only with the dog and her personality, but with her extraordinary nose, her prey drive, and her, for lack of a better word, her sense of humor. She moved in and established a relationship with the cats that lived in our house at that time. And interestingly, I had received an invitation to go on my first ever pheasant hunting trip to Kansas. It was months away, and I had no image that I had owned a bird dog or that I had a bird dog that was merited traveling to Kansas. But I used to take long walks on the paper company clear cuts, which were at that time abundant around Chattanooga. They've since all fallen to development. But within 30 minutes of my home, I had tens of thousands of acres of pine plantation clear cuts in various stages of growth. And I would often go out looking for woodcock, really just to observe woodcock in those plantations, never dreaming that there would be anything other than woodcock there. And the very first time that I took Madison out on a walk in one of these pine plantation clear cuts, she suddenly stops in the middle of the road, pivots very slowly to her left, raises her paw up, and I thought, oh my God, there's a rattlesnake here in the middle of the river or something. There's a possum dead in there. And I walked in to pull her off whatever it was she was sending, and dadgummed if a covey quail didn't come up. And I was totally smitten. And I've never been, I was totally excited, and I've never been less excited since that first point. I now look back and realize that Madison was a wonderful first bird dog, was not a great bird dog, was a great companion, and was a great member of our family. We had her for 13 years, and she was the best natural retriever I will ever own. She was the best natural dead bird finder. But she was so devoted to me and to my wife. If I hunted her alone, she would range wide and explore thick and thin, up and down. But if I hunted with anyone else or with any other dog, she felt like it was her job to protect me, and she would probably not range more than 50 feet out, making sure that she was always between me and whatever other dog was down. And I finally figured that out, and it became a wonderful way to have a long and short tandem when hunting with partners. And Madison turned into a spectacular pheasant dog. I can remember those were the heydays of CRP in Kansas, and you would just quietly put her down, and unlike a fast-moving roller coaster of a dog, Madison would put her nose down and track, and you could just go to port arms and follow her and follow her and follow her, and it would never fail that she would eventually pin a pheasant, and boom, there you go, and then you go after another one, and she would always make a great retrieve. So she was my first bird dog. Traveled, we grouse hunted here in the Appalachians of Tennessee and North Carolina. We did a lot of pheasant and quail hunting in Kansas. she lived till she was 13. She had her best ever dove hunt the Labor Day of 2006, and she hated to swim. That was the one drawback. And I remember knocking down a dove that landed out in the middle of a farm pond. And for the first time ever, she tracked it down, jumped in, swam out, and retrieved it like she'd been doing it all her life. And had a great day retrieving birds for everybody in the field that day. And 4 days later, she was dead of a belly full of cancer that we never saw. Hunted her heart out and had an incredible career and really went the way you would like your dogs to go. It was not slow and piece by piece, but it was very quick decline. We took her to the vet. They took a scan. She was riddled with cancer, and that was that. But what a great introduction to my first bird dog. I guess after I had Madison 3 years, and I've already mentioned Pat Graham, he bred his wonderful German Shorthair Kate to a best friend's German Shorthair Diamond, and they had a litter of 8 dogs, one of which he gave to me, and that became my Shorthair Elsie, who really took my hunting up to the next level. And that's when I began to explore all over the Midwest. Early years in Kansas, one year my partner and I, a different partner named Jim Ballard, and I got ice stormed out of Kansas, and 3/4 of an inch of ice covered everything, and we realized it wasn't going to thaw for several days. So we got in the car and drove south until we saw no ice, which happened to be the panhandle of Oklahoma. And the first day we were on the ground in Oklahoma, I think we moved 10 coveys of quail. They'd probably been frozen out from feeding for a couple of days, and it had warmed up. And we thought we had died and gone to heaven. We could not believe our good fortune. And that rooted us in Oklahoma for several years. And as you can tell, I am a huge fan of public land bird hunting. Yes. And I think if you can find birds on public land, then all is right in the world. And obviously there are many reasons you can't find them often when there's a bad hatch or drought conditions or whatever. But if you can go to any of our nation's vast public lands and find birds, everything's going well. And I love to do that. It's still what given the choice, I find a great big wide open piece of public land on the map, and that's where I'm going to start hunting. We had many fun years of pheasant and quail in Kansas, then some great years on quail in Oklahoma. Then I had a buddy here in Chattanooga who had gotten very active in field trialing, and he got especially active in red setters. And he believed strongly that the best trial dogs that he was ever going to run were dogs that experienced a lot of wild birds. And he had a connection to a day lease in Texas, and this was probably in 2008, and needed some company to accompany him to Texas for the long drive, probably 18-hour drive from here in East Tennessee. So 4 of us jumped in the car and went out to a day lease in Texas, and this is not big news to a Texan who's used to the glory years in Texas, but for a Tennessee bumpkin who would consider a one-cub day to be a miracle, the first day on this day lease in Texas cost us $200 a person. We moved 15 cubbies, got our limit, couldn't believe, and we moved around. I think we hunted for 3 days with almost the same results for 3 straight days, and I, of course, had never experienced anything like it. That's where I learned more and more about how much birds will run, particularly quail, how much they will run, how much they will use a plum thicket or comparable cover. One of my favorite memories is that first year when my puppy, who's now, the years don't add up, but I bred Elsie to the wonderful line of short hairs and walnut hills down just south of Chattanooga and Lafayette, Georgia, Rick Hopkins and Brenda Rowe, and they have a national championship line of particularly Nastra dogs, and they nicely bred one of their stud dogs to Elsie, and she gave us 3 pups. We bred her when she was 8, so it was a late life breeding. And in the very early years of hunting Elsie with her 3 pups, we were in that Texas day lease, And if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't believe it. And other experienced hunters have seen it all the time, but it was clear the dogs were on scent, and they had slowed down, pointed a couple of times, relocated a couple of times. The ground in front of us was pretty naked, and you couldn't see a thing. You could see some sparse grass and some plum thickets up ahead 30 or 40 yards. And all of a sudden, Lucy, who could not have been more than 1 or 2 years old at the time, the pup, got eyes as big as saucers and turned around and ran almost between my legs going the other direction. My partner laughed and said, "Gosh, she looked like she saw a ghost. What in the world happened? What scared her?" And I said, "I don't know. I've never seen this behavior before." She ran straight behind us and then took a 90-degree turn to the left and then got 50 or 60 yards out, ran straight past us, going back the direction she had come from, went 70 yards the other direction, turned and came back to us and pinned the cubby in front of us. First time she'd ever seen running birds. I do not know how she figured it out. I do not know how she knew where to handle them, where to push them, how not to bump them. And so we walked in with her mom on our side and her on the other side, and just had a fine shoot, is the way I describe it. So one of those miracles of bird dogs you just don't expect and don't understand. And when you see it, you realize they know a whole lot more than you do.
Yeah, especially from a young dog like that.
It was wonderful. So around here, I grew up in my early days of bird hunting, exploring these paper company clear cuts, and there was a general rule: I would find a single clear cut in every cubby, find a single cubby in every clear cut that we hunted. It was hard work. We don't have plum thickets in Tennessee. We have blackberry thickets, and you could not go hunting without heavy Filson chaps and leather gloves, and dog would get scraped up with briars. You'd get scraped up with briars. But you could always count on finding a cubby with a lot of hard work. Occasionally you would find two. And then the world began to change. The paper company for a long time had leased to the state of Tennessee the right to hunt their land. If you bought a $50 license, you had the right to hunt their land for probably 300,000 or 400,000 acres. I think it was 400,000 acres of land, mostly on the Cumberland Plateau and in Middle Tennessee. And it was a bird hunter and deer hunter's dream, particularly a deer hunter's dream. And then probably starting in the mid-90s and late 90s, they figured out that they would make a lot more money if instead they leased the land to private hunt clubs. And immediately when they made it possible to do that, deer hunting clubs sprung up and would syndicate 15 or 20 memberships and pay good money to the paper company. I don't blame them for doing what they did, but most of the deer hunting clubs then did not like bird hunters disturbing the deer, and so all of a sudden, all of my local haunts were closed to bird hunting, and my heartbreak finally came. My favorite clear cut, which was just 30 minutes from my home, a huge, big, multi-thousand-acre clear cut, was leased to a fox hunting club. And I thought, well, gosh, fox hunters not going to mind me. The seasons are different. They're not going to mind me coming looking for quail. And I finally found the president of the club and asked him if we could go quail hunting 2 or 3 weekends during the season. And he said, "Oh, there's no quail out here." And I said, "Yeah, there are. There's at least 3 cubbies on this clear cut." And he said, "Well, that'll help feed the foxes," and didn't give us permission to hunt. So that was the end of my local quail hunting. There were the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency had established some wildlife management areas very close to downtown Chattanooga. I could probably be in one of them in 15 minutes if I got in my car right now, 15 or 20 minutes. And for several years, a couple of those held one cubby. And I would go train my dogs, and with any luck, in September or October, would put a cubby in the air. But all of the areas around all of those WMAs have now been developed. The TWRA has started managing them more for waterfowl and has put in some impoundments, which they flood in the winter. And if I had to go find a wild covey of quail today, I do not know. And if you told me I had 2 hours to find a wild covey of quail, I would not know where to start, which is a real tragedy. I remember growing up in North Chattanooga, there was a covey of quail that lived in my grandmother's yard across the street from the golf course, and I'm talking in the middle of downtown. And of course, there's nothing like that anymore. So I know that there are a few birds around there. I hear friends tell me they heard a whistle this summer and a whistle here and a whistle there, but I could not, with any degree of certainty, put my dogs on the ground tomorrow and find a wild covey here.
That's a shame. What a shame.
It's just, so that's why I and so many friends of mine fell in love years ago with jumping in the car and driving 12 to 17 hours and finding programs like the spectacular public WMAs in Oklahoma or the walk-in in Kansas. Walk-in in Kansas in the height of the CRP years, I don't think we had any idea what a paradise that was until you look back on it now.
Yeah.
And I think, we all know that nature can heal itself very quickly, and I think that with enlightened management, those days can come back. But everybody's, of course, concerned about the decline of quail, and we'll return to that in a minute. Another great thing that happened, again, to the traveling upland hunter theme of your podcast, my Chattanooga partner, Jim Ballard, and I were hunting land in Kansas probably now 17 years ago, and we were members of a nice group run out of Kansas City called Mid-America Game Bird Association, which is now the Mid-America Hunting Association, and they were one of the early kids on the block. They would go lease very attractive private land. This was before the days of walk-in, and secure the rights to hunt that private land. And they would have deer hunting, turkey hunting, waterfowl, quail, you name it. And then they would sell memberships at a very reasonable cost with annual dues. And so when I upped my game in Kansas to hunting more than just walk-in, I would follow the recipe of the Mid-America Game Bird Association. And the way that worked, you would call headquarters and say, I'd like to hunt in Rooks County, Kansas on November 27th. And they would say, okay, Rooks County map A is available. And I would go to Rooks County, and I wouldn't have to go knock on a farmer's door. And all of that worked, and Mid-America was a terrific resource. They've now changed some of their emphasis more towards deer hunting and trophy deer hunting. But Mid-America was a great resource, and my partner Jim Ballard and I were hunting a section with a series of crop circles over 3/4 of the section, and the other quarter was a sandhill that did not have planted crop. And we were walking through, had already moved a couple of coveys. My favorite bird dog I mentioned earlier, Elsie, had retrieved a skunk for me, fully live and functioning skunk, which I still can smell on my dog for collars to this day, 17 years later. And
that's great.
We mounted the top of the sandhill and realized that there was another hunter working the edges of the crop circles behind 2 yellow labs. And so we wanted to make sure he knew we were there and that we knew he was there. So we walked over to his car, parked on the side of the road in the middle of the section. And he came up about the same time we got there, and he was a little skeptical of who we were, and we told him we were Mid-America members, and he wanted to see our memberships, and he had been told there was nobody else in that map that day, so he was a little surprised that we were there. And then he saw our Tennessee plates and said, "God, you must be quail hunters." We said, "Yeah," and he said, "I don't care about those little quaily birds, I'm out here for pheasant. Let me show you where I've moved coveys over the past week." And so he got our respective maps out, and I'll never forget, he marked 17 different coveys that he had moved over the course of the previous 10 days. He was working out of Kansas City, and dadgummed if we didn't go over the next week and find a healthy majority of those coveys exactly where he had marked them. And that really taught me where the quail are in Kansas. around here hunted the edge of a field next to a woodland. And in Kansas, you can find them in the middle of a pasture. If there's loafing and brooding and feeding and resting cover, they don't need an edge. And that was a real education. Brian, I know you know that in Oklahoma.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You won't find them in a CRP field. You find them around the edge of a CRP field.
Exactly.
The only time they'll be in the middle of a CRP field is if there's like, a water hole and some trees, some brushy cover, but.
And an access road to a pump jack that's got some low grass around it.
With weeds.
And,
you need
yes.
sunflowers or ragweed,
Yes.
So, absolutely. Well, I want to unpack some of what you talked about, Alan, because, man, you covered some ground there, buddy. First is, I am amazed at the number of bird hunters that came to the sport after developing a passion for fly fishing. I think the two things really, in a lot of ways, go hand in hand. Have you noticed that at all?
Absolutely, and I've got my theories about it, and I'm sure you do too. What do you think brings those like-minded or people with those minds to those two passions in particular?
I think they're both beautiful. I think they're both visually pleasing to the participants and to people who are watching the sport being undertaken. And so if your pull to fly fishing is that the visuals, then you're going to recognize some of the same themes in upland bird hunting with a dog.
Exactly.
I mean, that's my theory.
I think there's a deeper level also. My father used to kid me. Why are you going out to that beautiful Hiwassee River with a fly rod when you could go out there with a Rapala on the end of your spinning rod and catch your limit in 20 minutes? Why are you instead going out with a fly rod? And he was deliberately jibing me a little bit for being a snob, and which I hoped I wasn't, but he was having fun with me. And I began to think about it, and what I finally came to realize is that if I am casting a tiny dry fly and covering a rising trout and see his feeding lanes, and I'm able to put that fly on the water in a way that mimics a dun of a hatching mayfly or a popping caddis, and I take a trout, it means that I've taken the trout by his rules, by nature's rules, and I, therefore, am a part of nature. And I feel that way, I felt that way for decades fly fishing, that I cannot succeed well at fly fishing unless I'm into the same rhythms as the fish is, and the same rhythms that the mayfly or the caddis or the nymph is. And when you're in that rhythm, it's a glorious feeling. And I think that the same thing is true when you have a dog on point and a bird or a covey or whatever pheasant you have in front of you comes up, you have played by nature's rules, and it's a glorious feeling. And I think that's why those two sports share so much in common. Yeah,
and they really do. It's amazing how many people that I meet that are bird hunters that also are fly fishermen, passionate about fly fishing. So a lot of comparisons there. And then another thing you talked about was getting started with Vizslas. My first real bird dog was a little red Vizsla bitch, Scarlet, that I took all over the southwestern United States hunting birds. And she was by no means the best bird dog I've ever owned. But she was a wonderful, wonderful dog and more than serviceable in the field.
There's a great writer, Rick Bass, whom I love. He's an extraordinary observer of nature, and he is also a passionate bird hunter. His politics are out there on the aggressive end of land conservation, as mine sometimes are, but he has a book about his first German shorthair, and in that book, in the opening lines, he comes into ownership of this short hair by accident. A friend gave it to him, and his line was, we fall into grace. It lies all around you, above and below, and we fall into it. You don't get there by design or intention. You fall into it, and that is so true of so many things in this sport. You fall into them. You don't know. You're not looking for them, and you fall into them.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I can tell you that I bought my dog because I wanted a bird dog. If I'd known then what I know now, I probably would have never owned a Vizslas. I've owned 3 through my hunting life, but they're lovely, lovely animals and a great way to get started in bird hunting.
And your last one, if my memory serves, you lost about exactly a year ago, maybe in early December a year ago.
That's right.
After a full career.
Yeah, he was 14. Rhett was his name. You can log on to my YouTube page and watch videos of Rhett pointing birds.
I have, and that's one of the reasons that I found you, was I saw you've got the best GoPro pictures, both on those mounted on your dogs and those that you film. You can tell you've really worked at getting the good pictures and editing them carefully. You've got a half a dozen of the best cubby rises I've ever seen. Looking carefully at your videos, some of them you can reach out and touch the quail with the end of your gun, and they're just spectacular. And that's not easy to do. That's a lot of hard work.
Well, you just got, and it is a lot of hard work. It's easy because I love doing it, and I'd be out doing it anyway, even if I didn't have the camera. But I don't know. It was 4 or 5 years ago. I bought that little GoPro on a whim and started wearing it when I would just go hunting myself, and I really got a lot of positive feedback from my friends when I would send them the videos, you know. And boy, my videos have matured. You can look at my early ones, and they're not near as much fun to watch as the more recent ones are. And the technology has improved. Of course, I've updated my camera quite a bit, but I love being able to share most of the things that I love about bird hunting. I love being able to share that. I love being able to talk with guys like you about what they love about bird hunting. I love being able to take somebody that's never seen a dog on point and show them what it looks like, and take fellow bird hunters maybe that have never experienced a bobwhite quail covey flushing and sit them right down in the middle of one going up. And I really love being able to share those things that I enjoy.
There are so many benefits from doing that. My friends give me endless grief. I very often sling my gun and carry what's now probably a 7-year-old high-definition Sony video camera, and I've been trying for 7 years to capture one good hunt and one good point and one good flush and one good shot, one good retrieve, and if there is a way to screw up a video, I have found it. There are probably another 100 ways to screw them up that I have yet to find, but it makes me appreciate how hard it is. I laugh. I used to enjoy the show Hunting with Hank.
Oh yeah, me too.
I didn't like his canned hunts sometimes, but Hank to me was a wonderful bird dog, and Des Young was a perfect TV host. And he had both Hank and then Hank's son Dash, and I realized how hard it was to produce those shows, because over and over and over again, they would get great points, great flushes, and edit them extremely well, and I've never come close to that kind of quality.
Yeah, it's hard work. It really is.
How much time do you have to spend editing after you get out of the field?
Well,
do you sleep during bird season?
No. I do that during the week in the evenings. Is when I do that. I can tell you that for every 2-minute clip or 3-minute clip that I put up, that I edit and put up, I probably have 2 hours of video that I've taken, maybe even 3, and I've gotten better at just catching the stuff that I intend to catch. That's an art in and of itself. And then to put that all together and make it visually pleasing in a way that a guy is going to enjoy sitting down and watching, that's even more of a challenge. But But you want
Do
to talk?
you have special editing equipment or a 10 terabyte hard drive that you download onto?
No.
How do you store it?
Well, I do have some software, some nice software that I bought, and then you'd laugh. It's typical redneck. I've got 3 standalone hard drives. So I've got a 1 terabyte hard drive that I store my raw video on, and then I have a little bit smaller hard drive that I store my projects on. So as I'm working on stuff, that's where it goes. And then my final output video goes on a 3rd, even smaller hard drive. And I can tell you that I probably need more space because video takes up so much space. And to be honest, I need
even an iPhone video a brief iPhone video can be 50 megabytes in a heartbeat.
Yeah, and not only do I need more space, I really need more processing power because I've got a GoPro 7 now that I use, and it takes 1440 video, which is just friggin' beautiful. I mean, it's gorgeous video, but my old PC just, I mean, it struggles. And I know you're going to laugh at this, but my hobby in the summer is I play computer games. And so I am not technologically naive, nor do I have some junky piece of crap PC sitting in my office. I run a pretty high-end PC, but man, that video just munches down on that processor. So, you know, I've been making do, but it sounds like I've got a good excuse to buy a new gaming PC this summer.
Well, open that can of worms.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell my wife it's to edit videos. That's what I'll tell her.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
I'll tell you, Alan, you know, you talk about catching good video of quail flushing, which is hard to do, but I've probably got, I don't know, 10 or 12 flush clips that really do a good job of showing it. I've got one that I took this weekend that I just put up, and that bird flies between me and my buddy's son, and the first bird up, I probably could have hit it with the barrel of my gun.
Wow.
And on that video, it's cockbird. On that video, you see it get up and it turns its chest to me as it goes between us, and it's looking right at me. I mean, you can in the video, you can see it looking at me as it flies between me and my buddy, and it can't be 4 feet from me, Alan. It can't be, you know.
Wow. I can't wait to see that. Wow.
But the reality is that there's a lot of people go their whole life, and they never get within 4 foot of a bobwhite in the air, ever. You know, I hunt thousands of hours, and I hunt in places where there's lots of bobwhites, and I just happen to kind of have myself situated to where that one time happens ever so often. I'm able to capture it, and every now and then I get lucky and capture something that somebody likes to see. So.
Well, keep it up, because it's a joy.
Oh, I really love doing it. I don't. It sure burns a lot of hours, but it's fun for me. And you know what? I'll tell you, there is something harder than capturing a covey of bobwhite flushing on video, and that's getting good footage of a rough grouse flushing. And if you go and look on my YouTube page, I caught video of a grouse. It got trapped underneath a pine tree, and it didn't have anywhere to go. It was surrounded. There were 2 dogs, and they were kind of opposite one another, both on point. And then me and my buddy were moving up from 2 different directions, and I think it was trying to go under that tree and come out the other side. And then it saw us, and so it went back, and by the time it figured out that the gig was up, we were right on top of that bird, and that bird comes flying out from the base of that tree, and you see it navigate through those lower branches of that it was a spruce tree is what it was, and then it turns, and about that time my buddy shot it, and one of the dogs went over and retrieved it. And I tell you what, I don't remember the last time I was that excited. I had the camera running the whole time. I knew, because I've been doing it enough, I knew that was going to be really cool video. And
Wow.
and I tell you what, it was like I just shot a 200-point whitetail, you know.
Wow.
A 200 class whitetail. I was so stoked about getting that video. So, you know.
Have you trained yourself to try to hold your head steady
Yes.
instead of jerking around, which I would do?
Yeah, you got to learn to look with your eyes, not with your head.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I mean, you just gotta think about, and good hunters do this anyway. In my experience, and I've hunted with a lot of different people, and people that are familiar with their game, and they've hunted quite a bit, and they've got a level head on their shoulders, and they're thinking about where those birds are going to get up. They're thinking about where the birds are likely to be when the dog's on point. Then they're thinking about where the birds are going to get up, what escape cover they're going to go to, and all of that factors into where I position myself to try to get the best video. Shooting the birds anymore for me is just almost tertiary. I really crave the good video more than I crave killing birds.
I do love to eat quail, and I love to successfully hunt and shoot them, but I completely agree. There are many times when I get more thrill out of watching one of my hunting partners move in and a covey flush, and in the rare circumstances that I capture it on video, that's a kill. It's a great thing.
Yeah, it really is. And you know, Alan, and you're going to laugh at this, but if you spend time around bird hunters, you know, people talk about, oh, I shot a double today, right? And I've hunted behind some pretty good wing shots, and shooting a double on a covey of bobwhite quail is a lot more rare than men would like you to believe. I've got,
it is in my world. It sure is in my world.
Yeah, and I've got 3 examples of that on video. So I can tell you with 100% certainty, because I can by God show you 3 of my own doubles. And I've just got enough, I guess it's pride, that I kind of get a kick out of that. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I shouldn't let my head get big in that regard, but when I say I shot a double, I can generally pretty much show you that I did.
Here it is. I have noticed, and I have one hip replacement and a brand new knee that hasn't yet healed well, and I don't know what it's going to mean to my hunting this year, but my shooting skills have really diminished now that I'm in my mid-60s. I still think I have pretty quick reflexes, but there is something going on where you know how you feel everything is right when you swing on the bird, pull the trigger, and expect it to go down.
Yeah.
And for some reason, they're not going down the way they used to.
Well, and I'll give you hope, Alan. The best wing shot I know, and I know a lot of guys that like to hunt birds, but the best wing shot I know is going to turn 80 this year.
Wow.
And,
wonderful.
And he just knocks them down like they're going out of style.
Wow.
So,
does he shoot at 28?
Oh God, no! He shoots a 12 gauge.
Okay.
He's a killer now. He's a vet from Fort Worth, Texas, and he's just the finest man, one of the finest men I know. And he's made a lot of money taking care of other people's dogs, and he keeps a string of bird dogs, and they're really, really nice bird dogs.
Well, I hope I'm doing that when I'm his age. That would be a dream come true.
Yeah.
Speaking of Texas, going back to the story where I bumped into this hunter who showed me the coveys of quail he had flushed. We sat there on the side of the road talking, and again, this is 17 or 18 years ago, and I started making fun of his using flushing dog and shooting clown birds out of it when he really needed a man sport to go behind a pointing dog and find quail. And we traded fun barbs for a few and I finally said, all right, I'm gonna breed this German Shorthair, and I'm gonna send one to you so you can grow up and appreciate the sport for what it can really offer. And we laughed about it, but a year later I did breed Elsie with the Walnut Hills dogs and had the 3 puppies, Lucy, Junior, and Jay-Z, and I sent Jay-Z to him, and he was a fighter pilot based in Kansas City at the time, and then moved to Arizona to fly out of Tucson, and we have now hunted together every year since with those pups. Only one of whom is left. My Lucy is now 15 and a half, but that gave me the excuse to drive to visit him in Arizona way back in 2008 when the pups were very young, and he took me in his neighborhood. He lives south of Tucson into some extraordinarily spectacular countryside where we hunted Merns or Mearns. I never quite figured out which way you're supposed to say it.
I call them Merns.
Merns, and apparently it was the one of the best bird years for Merns in the last couple of decades, and it was very hard on me as a flatlander, lots of steep up and down and hunting into the bottoms of these washes, and then the birds would be feeding on the side of the hills. But we had my dogs and then his pup, and I had a couple of borrowed dogs, including my friend's red setter, and I think we moved 28 coveys of birds the first day we hunted. I've never had a day like it, and those coveys are small. Those are 7 or 8 bird coveys.
Yeah, and they're magical birds, aren't they?
They're just magic, and I'll never be able to do that again. I could not hump those hills anymore with my artificial limbs, but it was the day of a king. It was just incredibly delightful.
I'll tell you what, Alan, I'll go out there and I'll hunt them and I'll tell you about it, okay?
and film it. I want to see the GoPro.
I have not filmed a Merns quail hunt. I probably ought to do that, shouldn't I? Oh, you know, I hear you talk, Alan, and I love to read, and of course I love to hunt, so I love to read about hunting, and you make me think about those stories by Nash Buckingham. You know, just the way that you talk and your mannerisms draw me to that fiction. Have you ever read any of him?
I have read a little bit of him, and he leads to a little lesser known author whose work I actually like better, Havilah Babcock.
I've read some of him too.
And he was truly, Buckingham had a national following. Havilah Babcock was truly a southern pursuer of bobwhites. I think one of his books is My Health is Always Better in November, and I agree with that. Nash Buckingham, I think, hunted everything, and I know some of his waterfowl stories. But then he also covered field trials. Was he the preeminent? I may be wrong about that.
And I don't know the answer to that question. He wrote a short story called Playhouse, that I go back and reread. If you ever get your hands on it, you should read that. It's a great story.
I would look for it.
It just, to me,
Robert Rourke's Old Man and the Boy is another classic that deserves any bird hunter to read. It's another classic from that same vintage.
Yeah, and listening to you talk today, it sounds like those days are gone.
They are around here. I am encouraged with stories that I hear from quail plantation in Georgia is a multi-millionaire's game, if not a billionaire's game. But I know folks, many of whom have now passed away, who bought Georgia quail plantations in the belt between Albany, Georgia, and Tallahassee, Florida. And I know folks that still, I don't know them well enough to consider them friends or to wheedle an invitation out of them, but they are running operations filled with wild birds where there are so many coveys on the ground. It's literally, you shoot one covey rise and another one rises 100 yards away, and 30 and 40 covey days, extraordinary abundance. They intensively manage those lands, lots of fire, lots of probably predator trapping. I don't know about hawk control. I did ask a manager one time whether they shoot hawks, which I do not favor. I think hawks, trained birds, had to be better wild birds, but I asked him if he shot hawks, and he said, no, that's illegal. Those are birds. It's illegal against federal law to shoot hawks. We shoot a lot of brown crows, though.
Yeah, I understand. Wow.
But there are people that maintain enormous populations of wild birds in Georgia and North Florida. So, given the right habitat and the right conditions, they're still out there. Unfortunately, that's at a scale that us day-to-day foot hunters can't afford, and that's why the put and take plantations are so prominent in this part of the world. But the best ones are those who do it really well. They can be pretty spectacular still.
Well,
if they have early release birds and all of that, that can be a great sport.
well, and you referred to it earlier, Alan, but that's a big money game, obviously. But the state of Oklahoma, the Department of Wildlife, whom I'm a big fan of, is doing the same thing for us in Oklahoma.
How so? You mean habitat management with giant WMAs, or how do you mean?
They purchased all that land down through the years, and now they're going in and doing burns, and they're managing it to maximize opportunities for Oklahoma quail hunters. Not only for Oklahoma quail hunters, but for Tennessee quail hunters too.
Us traveling quail hunters, absolutely.
And they're maybe not doing it with the same degree of intensity that those men and women are doing in Georgia, but in all reality, the Department of Wildlife here in Oklahoma is spending a significant amount of money every year to try to improve our opportunities on places like the Beaver River WMA.
Well, it has certainly gotten my vote and my attention, and I start my planning every year looking at Oklahoma. That's where I'm heading. Unless the department warns me that there's been a total bust in the hatch, I feel very confident that somewhere in those hundreds of thousands of acres of WMAs in Oklahoma, there's going to be some good quail.
Yeah. If you work for it, if you work at it, and you got a pair of dogs that'll cover some ground, you can find a covey of quail even in the lowest years, I think.
The best weapon in your arsenal is a good dog, and the second best weapon is shoe leather.
Yeah, that's right. Well, seemed like there was something else I was going to... talk to me a little bit about your public land advocacy. I know that's something that's important to you, and just tell me generally what you're involved in. You don't have to be specific, but the things that are important to you, Alan.
Ryan, that's a high ethic with me, and my self-education has evolved. I've been very blessed in my legal career to fall into, however you want to describe it, some extraordinary opportunities for conservation advocacy, and some of those are specific to Chattanooga. Chattanooga was ironically, it was a little bit of a forgotten town when the Sun Belt explosion took off after World War II, and places like Atlanta and Richmond and Charlotte and Charleston, all of these places exploded with job growth from northern companies moving down to the Sun Belt, and of course that's repeated tenfold in Texas. Chattanooga got neglected during a lot of that because going all the way back to the Civil War, lots of Northerners fell in love with Chattanooga during the Civil War, and it joined Birmingham in becoming one of the big steel mill towns in the South. And as a result of that, Chattanooga had a labor union legacy that had never been a problem for the city for 100 years. But when companies moved to the South from elsewhere, one of the main reasons they were moving is to move away from labor unions. So Chattanooga was bypassed with a lot of the explosive growth in the years immediately following World War II. And as a result, there was a remarkable amount. I came back to Chattanooga to practice law in 1980, and there were still mammoth amounts of open space available for conservation in and around Chattanooga. And through the work of a whole bunch of different private land trusts and enlightened advocacy at the state level, we'll never be finished with the work, but Chattanooga has surrounded itself with a ring of green. The topography of Chattanooga is hard to explain unless you've been here, but we have the Cumberland Plateau that forms the western boundary of our city. The Tennessee River cuts right through the middle of it in a province called the Valley and Ridge Province with rolling hills, and then the Appalachians are just 40 miles away to the east. And we have national forest protections in the Appalachians. We had a lot of timber company protections on the Cumberland Plateau, and believe it or not, the nation's first national military park was created following the battles of Chickamauga and Chattanooga and Lookout Mountain. So we had 8 or 10,000 acres of protected landscape right on the city limits. And so I grew up looking out at forested mountainsides instead of California development mountainsides. I've got hardwood forests all around me, and without knowing it, I didn't realize that everybody didn't have that. So I went away to school at the University of Virginia and came back, and you realize this is a special place. And lots of folks who grew up here had that same realization, and there were probably 5 or 6 different land trusts created in Chattanooga during the 60s and 70s and 80s, and they preserved an enormous amount of this natural landscape. Paper companies contributed the steep canyons where streams cut out of the Cumberland Plateau and it was too steep to harvest. Private landowners conserved a lot of land on the top of Lookout Mountain. We have a place called the Lula Lake Land Trust, which is spectacular. Lookout Mountain Conservancy has conserved a lot of land. There's a creek cutting out of the Cumberlands called North Chickamauga Creek, which flows right into downtown Chattanooga, and virtually the entirety of its watershed is protected in slivers of land. You can almost walk from the Tennessee River to the top of the Cumberland Plateau on protected land that will someday have wonderful hiking trails. The state of Tennessee created years ago, back in the 40s and 50s, Prentice Cooper State Forest, which is probably 8 minutes from where I sit. So the combination of a lot of inherited green space and then private advocacy, private foundations got into the game and gave generously to support a lot of these land trusts. And so today, Chattanooga has, for an eastern city, a remarkable amount of conserved land. And I've gotten to be involved in that both sometimes in my private law practice, doing conservation easements and land acquisitions, very often as a board member of a land trust. And and now Chattanooga is finally experiencing that explosive growth. And a lot of people move here and go, or a lot of people come look here and go, I had no idea what an incredibly beautiful place. Chattanooga 20 years ago called itself the Boulder of the East, and that's almost true these days. And you can come here and have a huge big river flowing through downtown that's become a paddleboard and kayaking mecca. We've got incredible tailwater trout fisheries all up and down the Appalachians and Cumberlands. We've got mountain biking that's world class from trails that the Southern Off-Road Biking Association has built. We've got world class hiking. All of these things that I took for granted growing up that I now hold very dear are results in many cases of private conservation advocacy, and I've really I've fallen into it and been blessed, and I hope my son is blessed and my friends are blessed, and their generations yet unborn will be blessed by the conserving of those things.
To tell you, you make me want to come and see it.
Absolutely.
Sounds like I need to include that in my future plans.
You know where we are on the map, and you know how to find it.
That's right. Hey, Alan, our hour is up, amazingly enough. Seemed like it went by fast.
It very much did. And we could go another hour, but I don't think your listeners would want to hang on that long.
They probably wouldn't. If you come to Beaver this year, you let me know when you're going to be here, okay?
Will do, and you can count on it, almost certainly.
And I suspect that in Tennessee there's probably a thriving craft beer scene, would be my guess.
Absolutely.
So why don't you bring me some of that when you come out?
I will. Just tell me your preferred poison, and I'll stock up.
I like anything that's spelled with an I, a P, and an A.
All right, your order's in.
Okay.
Ryan, talk to you soon. Thank you very much for doing this, and I suspect I'll see you eye to eye before January's over.
All right, that'd be great, Alan. Dead bird in here, dead. Dead. Dead.